Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Get Psyched. We are very excited to be back this week with the amazing Indigo practitioner and psychologist, Rashida. Thanks for joining us this morning, Rashida.
Hey Ash, thank you for having me.
We've got some juicy topics to delve into, but before we get started, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions just about how you're going. So, how are you feeling at the moment?
Right now, I'm feeling quite nervous. I think I have been feeling over the last few weeks probably a lot, like a whole range of emotions, some really hard, painful emotions, and a lot of anxiety, a lot of grief, a whole range of things. Right now, in this moment, though, feeling quite nervous, which I haven't felt for one of these before. But I think, that comes with the territory of doing Insta lives.
Absolutely, putting yourself out there and I guess talking on a platform, but we
Mm.
always love to hear your beautiful wisdom and your voice. So what are you failing at this week?
I guess I'm probably failing a little bit at boundaries, keeping to my own boundaries, being really mindful of my boundaries, potentially been overstepping my own boundaries the last week or couple of weeks. So just having to really check in with myself all the time and make sure that I'm being kind and compassionate to myself and really sticking to those boundaries that I put in place.
And what are you finding out about yourself?
Finding out that, you know, I guess through a lot of what has been happening in the last few weeks, I guess really reflecting, obviously, this movement is not about me, but I guess it has opened some doors to really reflect on my own experiences. So finding out how much I'm actually passionate about helping or supporting others that have had similar lived experiences. Hence, I guess, sort of opening up this conversation here today and really finding out like how important that is to me, which has been good, and realizing I have a platform to be able to do something as well.
Yeah, that's always really empowering. And so, for anyone who is new to Get Psyched, this episode today is going to be exploring cultural identity in the therapy room. Um, and it's an issue that's obviously very important to discuss now, especially with the evolution of psychology. Once it was just, someone who, went to uni and studied up about mental health and was supposed to, come into a room and know all the ways to kind of sort your head out. But now I guess we're seeing more of a move towards, people wanting to sit down and talk to others who just get them. And
Mm.
sometimes, when there are sort of social, racial, cultural boundaries, it's hard to really communicate, I guess, your lived experience when someone just has no idea. So, how important is awareness of cultural identity in the therapy room?
I think it's one of the most important parts of therapy. We know that in terms of therapy actually having an impact and having a benefit to the client, the number one part of therapy actually being useful is having a therapeutic relationship, having a positive therapeutic relationship with who you're working with. So the research shows us that at times it doesn't matter what type of therapy you're practicing. If you don't feel safe, secure, heard, acknowledged in that room with your therapist, then you could be getting told anything and it's not really going to sit with you. So I think it's really important knowing how much our cultural, racial, religious identities shape us, that we are working with someone who we feel is acknowledging that part of us and attempting to understand. Because, at times, even working with a therapist that may be coming from a similar or same cultural, racial, or religious background to yourself, we can feel like, okay, then they should be able to get it. But at times, even they might not completely have the same lived experiences as us, but it's more about the feeling that you get. And if you're feeling like you are actually being completely heard, and understood and listened to, then that's going to have a really big impact in the therapy room.
And I can imagine that that's not always, you know, that easy to find, I guess. Like, we kind of often just get a referral to go and see a psychologist. And so we end up with whoever we end up with, and just hope that the stars align when we're sitting in that room.
Yeah, definitely. And this is the thing, you know, I always, if I'm talking to people who are interested in starting therapy, you know, we talk about don't be afraid to sort of shop around for the therapist that you eventually feel like is the right fit for you. This is someone that you're eventually, if it, you know, if therapy is something that sits well with you, that you're eventually going to end up having a very close relationship with. You know, there is so much vulnerability, there is so much connection that happens in that therapy room that is quite hard to explain if you haven't actually experienced therapy yourself. So it's so imperative to be finding someone that you feel like you're actually feeling safe and secure with and comfortable with, and that you have an ability to be vulnerable with. And that's about talking to any of your experiences. And if you feel like you're with someone who's maybe brushing over or not really, you know, listening to some of your experiences, and that includes racial, cultural, or religious, then that can actually at times further traumatize you, or further, you know, make you doubt your own experiences and how much that's actually impacted you in your life. So I think don't be afraid to actually, yes, you know, sometimes if we go to the GP, we're completely, you know, at a loss of who to go and see. So we wait for their recommendation. And I think with therapy, we're often going into the therapy room thinking, okay, this is the expert, this is the professional. They should know, you know, how to guide me. They're going to be able to give me the answers. But it's a collaborative relationship. And, you know, you're allowed to sort of check in the first few sessions if this person is actually going to be the right fit for you. And if you're feeling like it's not, you know, to then find someone else that you feel like is the right fit. At Indigo, we, you know, from the beginning, we've sort of offered this perfect match promise, where we actually allow people to trial, I guess, therapy with someone. And if they feel like that doesn't end up being the right fit for them, we offer them to transition to another therapist, and that session is then paid for by Indigo. And I think it's so brilliant because it allows then that weight to be lifted, that I don't have to kind of stay with this person that is maybe not, and so their approach might work brilliantly for someone else, but if it's not working for you, then it's better to just transition on to someone.
Yeah, for sure. And we've got sort of a perfect match quiz as well on our website, where you can kind of go and filter our different practitioners, and we have, you know, like such a wide and wonderful range of different sort of ages and cultures and races, you know, so you feel like, you know, there's going to be someone there that you're going to click with.
Exactly.
So what sort of impact does our sort of cultural, racial, and religious identity have on how we see the world and how we see ourselves?
I think it's huge. I think, you know, it ultimately makes up our identity, you know, although it may be a part, it's ultimately, you know, who we are. And as a whole person, you know, if you're viewing yourself as a whole person, this is going to be one quite large part of that. Even if you don't identify with everything to do with your culture or race or religion, there's going to be, you know, it's going to have a very large impact on you and the way that you perceive the world and the way that you view the world and the way that others, you know, view you as well. So I think at times maybe it's not something that people realize is causing some difficulties with their mental health, but if we're with at times the right therapist, or if we ourselves sort of spend some time reflecting, we can really realize how much of an impact that actually has on our life and on our mental health. Especially if you're living, sorry.
No, well, I was, yeah, I was going to say, absolutely, like, totally agree. And I think that also sometimes if it's sort of cultures or races or religions that we don't have a lot of sort of firsthand experience with or exposure to, then we, like a lot of people's attitudes just default to the stereotype. And
Mm,
that can be a conscious thing either. But then I guess that attitude that someone brings to an interaction then in
mm.
turn affects the way that that person sees themselves too.
Exactly. And that's what we call microaggression, when, it is in the sort of covert, when we're talking about covert versus overt behavior, and microaggression being in more of that, the smaller remarks and the things that we might not see so obviously as racism or discrimination. So those are the things that when they're happening daily sometimes or throughout your entire life, and you can't pinpoint it to one sort of situation of experiencing racism, it almost makes you doubt that that is actually having such a large impact on you. And then if that happens again in the therapy room, like I was saying, in the therapist potentially brushing over a large part of your identity, or not really taking the time to really understand that can again then sort of make you feel like, oh, well, then is this actually such a big deal, or is it just in my mind? And that can really cause a lot of that trauma. We know that racist experiences that people face are linked in with PTSD symptoms. So, it can cause significant trauma. And I think that in these everyday interactions is where sometimes people can start to doubt their own experiences and how much
Mm-hmm.
that's actually making an impact on them. Mm.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And so also, like we're talking about, racial and cultural identities, but now sort of living in this multicultural society, there's sort of many people who are like sort of identifying with a variety of races and cultures. And so, I wanted to ask you, how might they access a sort of a more stable sense of belonging and identity?
I think, this is something that I've experienced in my life, and I've sort of recently discovered the term, I guess, that really fit right for me in identifying what this was, which is biocultural identity. Almost, to some degree, my experience is tricultural identity. And there's a lot of research out there and information out there about third culture kids, which is basically, being a child of a immigrant or living in a culture that is different to the culture of your origin or your parents' origin, and how that can create so many nuances in the way that you live, and the way that you experience the world. And I guess with this bicultural, tricultural identity, it's basically identifying with multiple cultures, and how that can then sometimes lead to this feeling of not belonging or not knowing where is home, or where do you belong, and where is your community. And I think just having someone to talk to about that, who can potentially, if you end up finding a therapist who may have had similar experiences, getting reassured and validated in that way, that this is not something that you're going crazy about, or that, is a isolated experience, because it can feel really lonely when you feel that you don't have people around you who have experienced a similar thing. And I was talking the other day about how sometimes if you're in a group in which not everyone else has experienced something like this, or is, just coming from one culture and doesn't have that experience of the bicultural or tricultural identity, you know, we other people can assume that we've had the same experiences as them, and then
Mm-hmm.
that can lead to people potentially unintentionally making comment or acting in certain ways that then sort of further further separates you from that group, and can leave you feeling, further disconnected. And that can be a really painful experience, and something that maybe is not so obvious on a day-to-day basis. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but if you can find people that are having a similar experience, or talk to people that have had a similar experience, really understanding which parts of each culture do you feel really connected with, and what are also what are some of the really positive parts of having a bicultural identity. It can actually be a really beautiful and rich experience to have multiple cultures that you're experiencing, but can also feel can bring up feelings of disconnection or displacement.
Like, I guess sort of even in our sort of inbuilt mode of needing to kind of belong, in a certain group or in a certain tribe, and now we're finding, ourselves, I guess, like getting rid of a lot of these barriers that, were so, as through our evolution, I guess, were so sort of strict and clear. And now, we're having to redefine these things for ourselves.
Exactly. And I guess, through the beauty of, I guess, having multicultural societies, we will have people that experience bicultural and tricultural identity. It's just understanding which parts, feel feel connected for yourself, and how can you just, feel reassured or validated in that experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that we've chatted before about some really great Instagram accounts that speaks to issues when it comes to mental health and therapy. Are there something you can recommend?
Yeah, I mean, at the top of my head, Brown Girl Therapy is brilliant, and has a link also on her story at the moment to the Black Lives Matter movement, and through that also has a whole host of other accounts that are talking about similar experiences, and how important, also for therapists out there, how important it is to actually check in on your own implicit biases and be mindful of what you're sort of bringing to the therapy room. But we can hopefully link a list of some of these accounts that people can go on and look at if they're interested in looking more into how much, cultural, race, or religion may impact their lived experiences, and how that can actually be really helpful to access therapy for that. I think sometimes people don't consider this as something that may be impacting their mental health, or else don't even consider it as an option, that maybe talking to someone about it may actually make them feel more validated in their experiences. And we know that, for certain people, mental health support is not that accessible. But I think that now that this is becoming, we're becoming a lot more aware of how much we need to be a lot more inclusive in the therapy world. Hopefully people feel that they can actually access support that's going to speak to them and their experience. Whereas I think sometimes therapy in the past has been very limited to a certain demographic. So now hopefully people are feeling like they can actually access therapy and therapists that will understand their experiences a little bit better, or try to understand their experiences a little bit better. Because I know in my experience, I've had, I found it very difficult at times to find a therapist who I feel is really hearing me and understanding me. And, finally then, and I think that's probably why I feel so passionate about ensuring that people are actually feeling like they're heard, and that their experience is getting acknowledged. And so, hopefully more and more we see that diversity even in the therapists that we have.
Yeah, for sure. And that's how you know you've got a good therapist, and everyone deserves that experience for themselves, because, unfortunately, one bad experience, in the therapy space can turn some people off for good. And it's just not the case. And sometimes it does take a while to find someone who clicks, but if you're there and you want to speak to someone, you deserve someone who is going to see you as your whole self, and you can sit down and feel free to talk about whatever you need to talk about, and be met there.
Exactly. And this is it, it would be so painful to think that there are people out there who sort of feel like, okay, I've had this experience in therapy, it's caused further distress, and therefore not going to, you know, try again. And I understand that experience, but you know, for those people that I work with that have decided to return, you know, it takes so much courage and bravery, and eventually, hopefully, finding that right person.
Yeah, so don't give up. And if you're looking for a new therapist, then make sure you check out the Indigo Project website. We've got over 30 incredible psychologists and counselors, and people just ready and waiting to sort of meet you and see you, just like Rashida. So thank you so much, Rashida, for chatting today. It's been great.
Thanks, Ash. Thank you.
And you can catch this on our IGTV once it's all done, and we'll pop up some links in the comments as well for you to follow some other Instagram accounts that we think might be a bit inspiring.
Great. Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Ash.
everyone.
See you. Bye.
Bye.